Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I want to talk today about nutrition and eye health, and in particular I wanted to talk about a group of phytochemicals called the carotenoids. Now, many people are aware that carotenoids have a quite unique role in human nutrition because they act as precursors to vitamin A. And if you've ever looked in a physiology book, you'll see that vitamin A is required for eyesight. There's a reaction that occurs when light hits the eye, and that reaction requires a vitamin A molecule. So carotenoids such as beta-carotene, alpha-carotene and beta-cryptoxanthin, they actually form vitamin A in the body, and that allows them to actually benefit our eyesight because they're supplying something that is required for a light reaction in our eye. Now that's quite widely known, and it's quite widely available information, and I didn't want to cover that today. What I wanted to talk about is the other role that carotenoids have in protecting our eyes from disease. Now, in order to be able to understand how carotenoids can protect our eye from disease, we really need to look at the function of carotenoids in plants. If we go to plant physiology and we look at carotenoids, carotenoids are produced by plants, they're synthesized. We can't synthesize carotenoids, we only get our carotenoids from the diet when we eat the plants. But plants are able to synthesize carotenoids, and they're also able to synthesize another group of compounds called xanthophylls. Now, xanthophylls are chemically identical really to carotenoids, but they are oxidized versions of those carotenoids. And plants have various synthetic pathways for producing xanthophylls and carotenoids, and they're also available. They're also produced in other photosynthetic organisms such as algae. Now, the pathways may differ between organisms, but there are a wide number of carotenoids that are produced in nature and a wide number of xanthophylls, and they all seem to have very slightly different effects. They tend to give plants either a yellow, an orange, or a red colour. So, for example, carotenoids and xanthophylls are found in many vegetables, and they give those colours to many vegetables. But they're also found in green leafy vegetables as well. Spinach is a very good source of carotenoids and xanthophylls, and obviously spinach leaves are green, so it doesn't always hold that they are these red, orange and yellow colours. Algae are a main food for flamingos, and the constant consumption of these carotenoids is actually what gives flamingos their pink colour. If you take these carotenoids out of the diet, flamingos are actually white. So they do have an impact on animal physiology. They are absorbed and they do accumulate in our tissues. Studies have shown that xanthophylls and carotenoids are absorbed by humans. Generally, when we eat the plant, we have to break open the cellulose cell wall. That releases the carotenoids to our circulation, and then the carotenoids are absorbed along with fat. So they go into micelles. Those micelles are absorbed to enterocytes, and then the enterocytes package the fat and the carotenoids into chylomicrons, and those chylomicrons enter our circulation through the lymph system. So they are absorbed. We know they accumulate in tissue. Now, in plants, what role do carotenoids and xanthophylls have? Well, it appears that carotenoids and xanthophylls tend to be associated with the light harvesting complexes in chloroplasts, and they appear to have two main functions. When the level of illumination is low, they do appear to be able to increase the rate of photosynthesis, so they actually help with the harvesting of light. However, when the amount of light is excessive, the carotenoids and xanthophylls actually act as antioxidants, and they can actually prevent oxidative damage in the plants. And if you think about it, that's quite important, because whereas an animal can simply move into the shade, move out of the sun, plants don't have that choice. Plants are fixed, and if they're exposed to high amounts of sun, they have to have some kind of chemical means to be able to protect themselves from the possible damage. And carotenoids and xanthophylls appear to fulfill that role. They seem to be particularly good at scavenging singlet oxygen. And what they do is they absorb the energy of the singlet oxygen, and they dissipate the energy as heat. So they're very good antioxidants, and that's what they do in plants. Now, when we eat them, they have the same function. They go into our tissues and they accumulate, and they appear to have this antioxidant function. Now, we're interested in the eye, and studies have looked at the carotenoids and xanthophylls that accumulate in the eye. And what these studies show is that there are two xanthophylls particularly that seem to accumulate in the eye tissue of humans, and those two xanthophylls are lutein and its stereoisomer zeaxanthin. Now these two xanthophylls accumulate in the tissue of the eye. They don't have pro-vitamin A activity. In other words, they're accumulating there for a reason other than producing vitamin A for this for the reaction that usually allows us to see, and therefore they have another function there. And what it appears is that these two compounds actually protect from oxidative stress in the eye. They act as antioxidants in the eye tissue, and that means that when, for example, we're exposed to UV light and that UV light generates free radicals in our eyes, these compounds actually protect our eye tissue. And there are studies that have been done in terms of foods containing the types of foods that contain carotenoids and xanthophylls are protective of, for example, age-related cataracts and also age-related macular degeneration. And there are other studies that have looked at individual compounds in the diet, such as lutein and zeaxanthin, and they are inversely associated with the risk of these diseases. So they do appear to be protective. Now, how do you get these in your diet? Where are they from? A really good source of both lutein and zeaxanthin is spinach. Most studies that have looked at the contents of food have shown that spinach contains high amounts of both lutein and zeaxanthin. It also contains, obviously, other carotenoids, particularly beta-carotene. Now, if you ate 100 grams of spinach, which is quite a large serving of spinach, you'd get probably about anywhere between 5 and 15 milligrams of lutein. And that's quite a lot of spinach to eat. You can also get these compounds, these carotenoids and other compounds in eggs. They tend to accumulate and give eggs their yellow, the egg yolks their yellow colour. Broccoli is also quite a good source of lutein and zeaxanthin. Green leafy vegetables generally, anything that requires or has undergone photosynthesis, so that's why green leafy vegetables tend to contain carotenoids and xanthophylls, because these compounds are produced by plants and they tend to associate with chloroplasts and chlorophyll, and therefore anything that's green and leafy tends to have these compounds in them. So spinach is a very good source, eggs are a good source as well, and broccoli also. You can get these compounds as supplements, and some studies have looked at supplements and they do seem to be very bioavailable. The bioavailability of lutein, for example, from spinach is about half that from supplements, and that's simply a reflection of the fact that the supplements don't have to be removed from a food matrix. So if you're obviously consuming your lutein from spinach, the spinach has a cellulose cell wall. That cell wall surrounds the carotenoids, and therefore obviously you have to actually break down that cell wall to be able to get the lutein and the zeaxanthin out. So supplements are a very good way. They are very highly bioavailable. And studies have shown that 15 milligrams a day of lutein, for example, as a supplement will increase plasma levels of lutein, and it will also increase our eye levels, the levels of lutein in the eye tissue as well. Another thing that's quite interesting in studies is that you can actually take other antioxidants to increase your levels of lutein and zeaxanthin in your plasma, and presumably that would also increase the levels in your eye. Now the reason this occurs is because, as I've mentioned before, all antioxidants work together. If you take higher concentrations of a particular antioxidant, you spare other antioxidants that are in your plasma, and therefore you use less of them up, and therefore they actually accumulate. So you can actually increase lutein in your plasma by taking, for example, beta-carotene or taking vitamin C. Some studies have looked at, for example, I think there was one I remember that took alpha-tocopherol, which is a form of vitamin E, and the subjects took no carotenoids at all, yet their carotenoid levels in their plasma increased when they took the vitamin E. So generally, if you want to look after your eyes, taking antioxidants generally is a good idea. If you want to target specifically xanthophylls that accumulate in the eye, you can take supplements, but as always I would recommend that you you take antioxidants in their food form. Now the reason for this is because if you tend to take isolated forms of carotenoids, you can actually decrease levels of other carotenoids. It's very complex and it's not fully understood, but for example, if you take high amounts of, for example, lutein, you may decrease levels of lycopene. And the reason for this is that because they're structurally similar, they tend to compete for transporters, they tend to compete for absorption, they tend to compete for transport in the lipoproteins, which is how they get round in our plasma. So if you take very high amounts of a single compound, you may actually decrease levels of other carotenoids in your plasma or other antioxidants. So it's better to actually take a broader spectrum, lower levels of a number of different compounds than it is to take a single compound in isolation. And for that reason, I would always recommend getting your carotenoids from a food source such as spinach. Studies have looked at spinach in different forms. If you cook it, if you chew it, if you mince it, and really the absorption of lutein from spinach doesn't change even if you eat the whole undamaged leaves. So spinach is a very good source, but there are other sources, green leafy vegetables. The lutein will accumulate in your eye along with its stereoisomer, the xanthophyll zeaxanthin, and they will therefore protect your eye from things like age-related cataracts and age-related macular degeneration. So if you're interested in eye health, which you should be, if you get exposed to the sunlight frequently, which in the UK at the moment is not a problem, but obviously when summer comes around that might be a concern, I would recommend that you try to include more carotenoid and xanthophyll containing foods in your diet. They have many other benefits as well. Both carotenoids and xanthophylls are possibly protective of cancer, and they may be protective of cardiovascular disease as well.